Hello and welcome to the Women in Super Queensland webinar series entitled Industry Leaders Q&A. And our topic for today is boosting retirement outcomes for women. And I'm ably joined by panellists Wendy Tancred, CEO of Mercy Super, and Anne Fuchs, who is the Head of Advice and Retirement at Sun Super. My name is Anne Janssen, so we have two Annes on the webinar today, and I will be your facilitator. So I am the founder of Estate First Lawyers and Special Counsel with the firm, and I'm also a National Director of Women in Super. Okay, so before we get started, just a quick thank you and acknowledgement to our sponsor. Our sponsor is Estate First Lawyers, and it is a law firm which is focused and passionate about estate planning for Australians. And it was founded on the vision that all Australians should have an estate plan as part of their financial future. And the best way to get that message out would be through the super industry and their super fund members. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to introduce our panellists. And I'm going to start with Wendy Tancred. Wendy is the CEO of Mercy Super and has over 3 decades of experience in the financial services industry, including senior executive and state head roles within major financial institutions. Wendy spent a number of years as CEO of a major HR consulting firm, leading a team focused on enhancing workplace performance for employers, and also spent some time as CEO of an information technology consulting business. So if we have any trouble with our webinar today, we know where to go. Wendy is a past lecturer on superannuation and insurance at the University of Queensland, and she holds a number of board positions. Hello, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Good. Okay. So our next panellist is Anne Fuchs, and she is the Head of Advice and Retirement at Sun Super. Anne has worked in the financial advice industry for more than 20 years. These ladies are giving away their ages.
We have used excellent moisturisers, don't we, Wendy?
We've got that sort of screen over us to make us look even better. And passionately believes great financial advice can change people's lives. Prior to joining Sun Super in 2015, Anne was the Chief Commercial Officer at the Association of Financial Advisors, where she was responsible for income generation and servicing of their commercial stakeholders, which are members, licensees, and corporate partners. Anne and Sun Super Chief Economist Brian Parker run the popular Sun Super podcast series, New School of Super. And I've listened to a few of the podcasts and I can thoroughly recommend them. Anne.
Thanks for the plug on the New School of Super. That's very kind of you, Anne. Thanks. Good fun being here, isn't it, Wendy?
It is. I think we're in for a fun time and a very informative time as we run through 5 questions in relation to women and their retirement outcomes. So without further ado, we're going to go to the first question, and we're going to start with a fun fact, or actually a sobering fact, before we ask the question to our 2 lovely panellists. The first fact is that, as you may already know, women retire with 47% less super than men on average. And so there's some figures there for you. And that's a big disparity. So my first question to Wendy and Anne, and I think we'll have Anne go first because she's quite passionate on this topic, is what are some of the main reasons for this imbalance between the super on retirement? Anne, what are your thoughts?
I think that structurally we still have a way to go in terms of recognising the value women contribute to our overall economy. And if COVID hasn't taught us this, then I don't know what has. If you think of the largely female-dominated professions or industries, whether it's hairdressing through to aged care workers, the casual workforce, these are all female-dominated industries where they are being paid the minimum wage. Aged care workers, very poorly paid, mainly women, and yet the male-dominated industries, if you're the same qualification for an aged care worker, in terms of a trade qualification, is the same as a metal worker or thereabouts, but the pay differential is profound. So it says that society still values the contribution of men and their work versus women. And I think that this concept of equality versus equity, profoundly different. The analogy I use is if you gave Kylie Minogue and Michael Johnson a milk crate and asked them to look over a wall, Kylie still couldn't look over the wall because it's the same milk crate. So the economy needs to look and think very differently around equity versus equality and how we give women a genuine leg up, because we give a lot to our communities and the economy.
I couldn't agree more with Anne on those, and the care not being as valued. From there, it's mathematics. Because the compulsory system of superannuation is a percentage of your salary, it's pure mathematics. On average, women have less going in at whatever part of their career. They do tend to, in addition to that, take career breaks because they take time off to look after their families, etc. So then it's pure mathematics from those. And for women who are in small business owners, a lot of small business owners are women. It's not a compulsory system for them. It's more voluntary. And people tend to worry about what's most immediate and be concerned about their circumstances today rather than worrying about retirement, which is a long lost time in the future. Having said that, if someone's getting very close to that retirement age, it does creep up on you very, very quickly.
Do you want to say how close, Wendy?
Well, according to your stats later, Anne, I'm already over the retirement age of the average female. So,
okay, so in summary, we think it's a combination of the amount that women get paid based on the types of industry they tend to go to work in, and also the amount of time they spend in the workforce compared to their male counterparts. Do you think that those are two of the main reasons? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So, well, that's interesting, isn't it? And we could explore that conversation for quite a while, but we will move to the next question now. And this is an interesting statistic. So men retire on average, remember, these are all average figures. Men retire on average at 59.5 years of age, and women retire much earlier at 52 years. Now, because women also statistically, on average, live 5 years longer than men in Australia, it means that women will be in retirement for potentially 33 years of their life. And if you combine that with the fact that they have a low super balance, you can see that there's going to be a spot of bother. Now, my question to Wendy and Anne is, what strategies do you believe the government could implement post-COVID? Because I realise we're in a bit of a crisis now, and it might not be exactly the right time, but when we get over this, and I do believe and hope we will, what government strategies could they do to boost women's super, realising this issue?
I think there's a couple
that Wendy. Sorry.
I think there's a couple, Anne, that could be implemented relatively quickly, and a number of the ideas I'm going to suggest have been discussed and mooted across the industry for some time. I will give the government its dues. In recent legislation, a couple of these problems have been solved with the reduction in the numbers of multiple accounts. So people who aren't watching how many superannuation funds they have, they'll certainly get an advantage from that when they're not paying unnecessary fees or insurance premiums, and removing fees on low balance accounts. So that's certainly a start. However, there's certainly a number of other concepts that can be done. First, and I would suggest foremost, is removing the requirement for the $450 per month threshold before superannuation guarantee is required to be paid. There's about 1 in 5 women who are employed and earning less than $450 a month. Now, my understanding is that's around 220,000 women who just by that one change, albeit it creates an impost on the employers from a costing perspective, depending how they structure it, but that will make a difference. Secondly, pay superannuation, be required to pay superannuation on parental leave. So if you are taking those career breaks and you do have some sort of paid leave, that superannuation be paid on top of that. I would also suggest that employers be required to pay the superannuation when they pay their salaries. So at the moment, you might get paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly, but superannuation guarantee payments to the super funds don't have to be made until quarterly. So the theft from that, with the employers not paying it, can see an increase in the funds going to where the people who actually belong. So unpaid superannuation is a distinct issue. And also for low income earners, which unfortunately a number of women across Australia are, is there some way that an additional contribution, the tax office knows all about all of us these days, so is there some way that a portion of the tax that has been collected for a particular low income, however that gets measured, can that be moved across from paying tax to a contribution into a super fund for the behalf of those people? Aside from that, I would suggest that once the research into COVID is complete and all the corporate dollars and all the money around the world that's gone into that, you could start doing research as to males being able to have babies, and it could be their turn to take the career breaks.
Oh, they couldn't handle it. But I said, and I think too, like if I look at, Wendy, you're on a couple of boards. I know I'm on Teachers Union Health, which is obviously teaching is a very female-dominated profession. But I think about boards these days are, by and large, the representation of women is much, much greater, and we are moving towards parity. But the one thing that we don't have are many female CEOs. You are one, Wendy, but there aren't many. And so I think along with all of those policies, I think what more can we do to get women as CEOs of companies? Because we know when women are in leadership positions, they bring women with them. And because the link between superannuation and salary, to your earlier point, Wendy, it's profound. You can have all of these government policies, but if you're on a low pay, you're on a low pay. And if you're structurally sort of kept from, the metaphorical glass ceiling, there's nowhere to go. So getting more women, just not on boards, but actually running companies to create career progression for women so they can earn more, I think needs to be given a push along, because not much has happened in the last decade or two on that.
Yeah. Now, this is not on the score sheet, but I just on that point in the glass ceiling, I mean, I think, I've certainly in the past experienced the glass ceiling, and I just wanted to throw it over to you guys to ask, have you experienced that? I mean, you have managed to get into very good leadership positions in your organisations, but do you feel it's been more of a struggle for you than, say, a male counterpart?
So Wendy and I are really different. I'll say one thing. So Wendy's much more sort of analytical, measured. I'll call it the hot Irish blood sort of. And so I just think about words. When I'm passionate, men are assertive. When I'm taking control, women are bossy. Stop being so emotional. And I think about over the last couple of, decades, these stereotypes around women's behaviour, I absolutely think they have slowed me down. And obviously having 3 children didn't help. But I've got a very supportive husband. But Wendy, I'll throw to you. Can you relate to any of those adjectives or descriptions that I've had thrown at me?
I can. I can't say certainly bossy. And another word that begins with B. It's probably got the same amount of letters, but
let's not say it on the webinar.
Look, I don't think I have been impacted by a glass ceiling, mainly because I've been so determined not to. So, and my personality is such. I do have 2 children that are now wonderful adults, but I never took that much time off. I took 4 months with one, 5 months with the other, because I actually much preferred to work in a work environment than stay home and look after the children, because that's just too hard. I could not do it.
So true.
Totally incompetent at that, and admire everyone who can, but it wasn't for me. I just found it too difficult. It was actually easier for me and my brain and my personality to go to the office and work, and it was go to the office in those days. So yeah, I think everyone's got their own stories and their own reasons and logic for their journey, and whether they've hit and bounced or hit and bashed through. It's certainly still there, but I don't think I've had too much of an impact on it.
Well, that's encouraging. And I think I've got a little bit of both of those stories in my own story. So very interesting. Thank you for sharing those insights. But we have to move along, guys, and we got to get to our next question. And this question, actually, when I saw these statistics a few years ago, I didn't believe them. But when I think about the statistics we've just rolled out in this webinar earlier, it does make logical sense that 40% of single women in their retirement experience economic insecurity and even poverty at some point in their retirement years. Remember, they're 33 years of retirement. And also, single retired women are the largest group of, growing group of homeless people. So how did this happen, guys? But that's not my question. My question is actually to do with the super industry and what part you think they can play in helping women not get into this situation. And I think I'm going to start with Anne.
I think, thank you, Anne. I think as a super industry, we really need to reflect on the effectiveness of our advocacy, our members' advocacy on behalf of our female members. There are tribes in this industry. We know that to be true. You've got multiple peak bodies, from the FSC to the AIST to ISA to ASFA. And so when there are many voices in a crowded space, and who does the government of the day listen to when there is an undertone of agendas and control and ideology even? And I think that if we were all to speak and park all of that and genuinely speak on behalf of our members, it would be very easy to speak with one voice and advocate for retirement outcomes for women. So I think it's on us to get our act together, speak with one voice to government, so we can actually have a step change in policy.
So united we stand and divided we fall.
Correct. And
right.
Yeah, and we have never been united.
We've never been united, and the energies are spent on things that are not necessarily productive for the industry as a whole. What we should be doing is united in one voice from a policy front, and then united in making sure that the community are generally speaking, members of superannuation funds, to increase their need for them to be aware of what's happening within their superannuation. It is their money. We spend so much time and energy working out what's in the best interest of the demographics of our funds and doing the right thing by our members. We must operate in the best interest of members. But there's no such thing as an average member. You know, there's not a member who's got 2.7 children or earns, you know, whatever it may be. There's no such thing as an average person. We're all individuals, and we need to have the industry, across the industry, understand the need for the awareness of what's going on in your superannuation fund, and have the industry united in increasing engagement and awareness of that, so people take accountability together with the industry funds for what their outcomes are in the future.
Because the history of super was the power of the collective. It wasn't the power of this individual speaking over this individual. The history of super is steeped in the collective, and everyone contributing to raise everyone's, raise everybody up so that they've got a dignified retirement, just, you know, not the privileged few. And I think that if we can go back to speaking as a collective, not go back to, I'm not sure we ever did.
Well, this is really interesting to me, because that's not the answer that I thought you would give. I thought you would say, well, we'll allow people to work from home a bit more and this and that. I didn't expect such a powerful answer. But you can only just imagine if the super fund industry was united in their policies, the government couldn't ignore it.
$3 trillion
No.
close to of money the super industry as a collective controls, and so that is a lot of power. So that power should be used to, to lift women up and give us an equal shot at retirement income equality to men. But we're not doing that.
Great answer. Okay, so now from the sublime to the ridiculous, it's time for a joke, because as you probably know, we are in COVID times, and if you didn't laugh, you'd cry. So time traveller comes to me and says, what year is it? My response is, it's 2020. And this is what the time traveller thinks of landing in this year. And most of us would never have seen a year with this kind of challenge. I know we haven't. We haven't had a pandemic in this proportion since the Spanish flu 100 years ago. So this is really interesting times, and we're flying by the seat of our pants a lot of the time. And the government has had to put in place a number of COVID response measures, to try and help us out of this. And one of them is the early release of super. As you know, for people who meet the requirements, they can withdraw $10,000 before 30 June, another $10,000 after 30 June. Now, to date, or within the last 6 days, 1.35 million Australians have gained approval to withdraw the $10,000 prior to 30 June. So that's a large number. And whilst women are 43% of that total, which is kind of good that they weren't in the majority, it's still a large number, and a lot of people are withdrawing the full amount. So my question to the panel is, what is the impact, in your opinion, of the early release of super for women's long-term retirement outcomes? And I'll hand that over to Wendy first.
Sure, I'll speak about my own fund. So obviously that's the one I know the statistics of the most, and I am different to the majority of super funds because we're a corporate fund. So a lot of our members are employees of the Mater hospitals and other Mercy entities, Mercy partner entities. So of the members in our fund who have requested and received the early release of money, they've averaged around roughly $8,000 in payments each time, not necessarily the full 10,000. 75% of those requested release are female in our fund. We are predominantly female fund. Close to 80% of our members are female, but there's still males there, but it's the females who are accessing the money. 75% are female. 36% of them is the highest demographic. That's between 35 and 44-year-olds, and the next highest is the 25s to 34-year-olds, which is 31%. The number of younger members in the under 25 age bracket, we've only had 7% of those members request release of funds. So we do have different demographics taking the release of money. The actual impact on that as they go forward and think about their retirement when they get to it, like I'm getting into it, is again back to the mathematics. So ASIC's Money Smart are saying that, if you're 25 now and you're intending to retire at 67, that 10,000 is probably worth about 24,000 in the future. And that's just the impact of compounding investment returns and that sort of thing. So it's back to the mathematics of you don't have that amount of money in there, so you're not going to get that amount of money out at the end. From a policy perspective, essentially we're just kicking the can down the road as to how these people are going to fund their retirement. And that's our biggest concern. We'll be doing a lot of outbound campaigns to these people who've taken their funds, hopefully in a time of need now, so you can totally understand if somebody needs to buy the groceries, it's really important that they continue to be able to do that. But hopefully be able to help them with some financial advice around, okay, you've done this, you've satisfied that this particular time in your life. What is that impact for you? Do you want to do anything about it and make up for that at some point of time in the future? So what other strategies could you do to combat having that taken out, depending on how old you are?
Wendy, I'll just ask a quick question of Wendy. Do you think that people who have withdrawn their super have understood the ramifications given compounding interest and so on?
No.
And
certainly, Sun Super has a very different demographic. There's 1.4 million members, of which it's multi-industry, from construction to retail to educators to retail workers, white collar workers. Overwhelmingly, I think it's about 200,000 members that have taken money or taken the opportunity. They are young people. They're under 30, and so there is going to be a problem, as Wendy said. Will they be in a position of financial security in 40 years' time? Well, this taking that money out is not going to help. And just like, me going to get a hamburger at the moment, which I'm doing a lot during the COVID crisis to get these size 10 pants not so tight. I've given up my size 8 size, and this is the whole thing, right? It's these are small things, but incrementally they do add up. I think education is important, but equally too, if you are a low-paid worker, if you are finding yourself unemployed, trying to claw yourself back, it's a really hard thing to do. So it's going to be tough for young people between house prices and their super. That's just been, in essence, there's barely any left. I am worried for young people and the future, because we'll have a huge debt as a consequence too as a nation.
Yes, and time will tell as to how this is going to all pan out, but methinks it's going to take a few years to pan out. As we get over this thing, is going to be a long tail in the curve, so to speak. So, ladies, I'm going to ask you a final question, and it's one that I think our members will be interested in, whether they're young or they're old. And that is, how can they take some control of their financial security for their future? So yes, we can wait for the government to implement things, and even our employers, but do you have any good advice for us on how women can boost their retirement income and just get some financial security moving into their retirement years? And I will hand over to Wendy first.
Thanks, Anne. I think my first piece of advice is don't ignore your superannuation. If you earn $50,000 a year, what is it with me and maths this morning? $50,000 a year, your superannuation guarantee is $90 a week, right? If you saw, actually you probably would not pick it up at the moment, but in normal circumstances, if you saw $90 sitting on the ground, would you walk over the top of it? No, you'd stop, you'd pick it up, you may try and find an owner or whatever you want to do with it. But people are ignoring their superannuation fund. We have so many conversations with members about some issue, and they go, oh yeah, but I never opened your letters. You need to make sure that your superannuation's working best for you. Are you in the right investment option for you? Is your insurance right for you? The old concept of paying yourself first is just as important today as it was when I was going to say preaching, talking to groups of women in the mid-80s as a women's financial advisor for AMP. The mantras of pay yourself first. Nobody's going to look after your future except for you. So take control of it yourself. Pay yourself first. If you can afford, if you are lucky enough to have SG paid for you, then look after where it's going. If you can't, what can you do to get some balance between satisfaction in your life now and putting something aside for the future? There's balance in everything. There's balance in eating the hamburger and the size of the pants. There's balance in work and children. We've got balances everywhere. So think about your budget, where you're going to spend it, and put that in balance in terms of, yes, what's required now, but also take control of your future yourself and put some money aside. If you're on $80,000 a year, it's $146 a week compulsory going into your superannuation. Don't just walk over the top of it and ignore it. Actually pay attention. When your super fund reaches out to talk to you and ask you a variety of things, actually pay some attention and be committed and engaged with it, and you'll certainly help yourself in the long run.
Okay,
I'll jump in and say, certainly, Wendy, you know, Mercy Super. So I'm the product of 12 years of Sisters of Mercy that were fierce feminists that always told us to be the doctor, not marry the doctor, as an aspiration. And I think you're spot on. I think the only thing I can add to what you've just said is recognizing that money is emotional. It's certainly one thing I've learned over the years in financial advice, and that what we learned from our parents as young children around the lessons about money and what behaviors you saw of them, whether you know it or not, you've actually taken it on board. And there are behaviors that are, and decisions and choices that are linked to emotions. And some people, just like if they're unhappy, they might eat. If they're unhappy, they might spend money. Or if they're feeling insecure, they feel like they need to buy a whole lot of stuff to keep up with the Joneses. And these things do have an impact. And women in particular are probably more prone. And I don't know that for a fact, but in terms of spending money to make sure we look just right, and buying shoes and all of this stuff. And look, I'm a platinum customer at Mecca Cosmetica, so I'm not coming from a place of judgment, but these things, it is balanced. To Wendy's point, we've got to be able to reward ourselves, but recognizing there, if it's all going on material things that you're wearing and going out and partying, there is going to be baked beans and a very ugly tracksuit at the end of your retirement, and that's not a happy place to be.
I love it.
It's an interesting picture.
And yes, that's right. And that just describes my weekends. But
yeah, but I'm sure it's a very lovely fleecy tracksuit. I'm just, there's having empathy with our future self. There's no point being, glamorous and lovely now if you're at risk of living on the streets when you're 65, and that is the actual hard, cold reality at the moment. So
I'm getting the vibe, ladies, that we need to be more financially attuned and educated, particularly in relation to our forced savings in super. And we also possibly need to put some savings aside rather than spending everything. And maybe we should be putting 10% of our wage aside before we even start spending it on other things. And I go back to one of Anne's podcasts where she said, which is something I do as well, and that is I buy my lunch instead of bringing it from home. And if I didn't do that, I'd probably have a bucket load more money now, and probably be a size smaller too. So there we are. I would like to thank you very much for coming in and being part of this webinar. I think that we have learned so much and got insights from women who are leaders in their field and who have deep insights on this topic. So thank you so much, Wendy and Anne, for that.
It was good fun.
Excellent fun. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure. I've enjoyed it. So just in closing, I would just like to give a plug to Women in Super. If you are not a member, then I would encourage you to get in touch with us. The information is on the slide here. To inquire on membership, it is only $109 a year. If you are part of the super industry, you'll probably find that your super fund that you work for is a corporate member of Women in Super, because most super funds are. And so therefore you might be able to just join their corporate membership program without having to pay or apply. So please inquire with your employer on the Women in Super membership. So thank you very much, and we'll close the webinar. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Anne. Bye, everyone.